Hello, TikTok friends. I pray that the Lord richly and abundantly bless you. Today, I want to talk very briefly about 3 different manifestations of the presence of God in the world and how we can experience the presence of God. The first sense of God's presence is God's omnipresence. Now, we see this in the Bible when David talks about in Psalm 139, "Where can I go from your presence? No place can I flee from your spirit. If I make my bed in hell, you are there with me. If I go up to heaven, if I ascend on high, you are with me," right? So that's talking about God's omnipresence, right? We even see in the Proverbs, it says that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the good and the evil. That speaks of God's presence, which is everywhere, even in hell, even where, sinners are, right? But then the second sense of God's presence, which is so important, is God's manifest presence. Now, God's manifest presence speaks about when God specifically chooses to manifest his divine presence or make his presence known or aware. Because you see, somebody can be in God's omnipresence and be completely unaware that God's presence exists, right? Like atheists. God's presence is where they are, but they don't know it. But God's manifest presence is when he makes his presence known to a person, where he reveals his presence. And we see this take place throughout the scriptures, right? But especially in the tabernacle. The presence of God dwelt between the cherubim upon the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies, right? And the manifest presence of God was there, and it was so holy, perfect, that nobody could enter into that place except the high priest one day a year on the Day of Atonement. And now, as believers, we have the manifest presence of the Holy Spirit in our spirit, in our innermost being. That is the Holy of Holies within man, because we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Our body is where the Holy Spirit's manifest presence dwells. But the third sense of his presence that we need to begin to talk about, because many Christians don't know about this, is God's cultivated presence. And when I mean cultivated presence, when I say cultivated presence, what I mean is the presence of God that we cultivate through continually pursuing and meditating on the presence of God every day. Now, what I mean is that when you take time to spend alone in the presence of God, meditating and focusing solely on God's presence, you begin to become more aware of God's presence, and his presence begins to manifest upon you and around you every moment of the day. Now, I know certain people who, whenever I'm around them, the presence of God is so tangible just being next to them. They don't have to say a word. They don't have to do anything. Why? It's because of the cultivated presence of God that they have cultivated over years and years of them pursuing and meditating on God's presence. And as they've begun to meditate on God's presence consistently, the presence of God has been cultivated in their life to such an extent that you can feel it even just being around them. That's what I want to carry, and that's what I want to develop so that I can be an effective witness for the gospel with the cultivated presence of God. I pray that this would bless you as we pursue Jesus together. God bless you.